This month, we focused on the theme of truth. On the last Sunday in March here, I want to name the truth as I see it when it comes to the state, progressive religion, and movement work. You may not see it the same way. That's okay. It's kind of a sport in Unitarian Universalism, disagreeing with the minister. Favorite denominational pastime. That's okay. But my charge is to use your pulpit to call it like I see it. So here goes. I keep having these moments of deja vu. Reading the latest online debate among progressive people or sitting in a contentious social justice meeting. Sometimes I'm transported back to the fundamentalist faith of my childhood. Now, I love so many of the people who had a part in raising me. I'm the person that I am today, in part because of their efforts, although they might not like to hear that. But it wasn't always easy growing up holiness Pentecostal. In the faith of my childhood, I lived and worshiped in fear. Fear of a great big God who was always watching me, who created an eternal fiery hell into which my next mistake might cast me. It made us judgmental, hypervigilant, always policing the boundaries, always policing one another's actions. Of course, in service of people's salvation and not because we just like to gossip. In that kind of faith tradition, there are sharp lines between holy and unholy, clean and unclean, pure and impure. It creates a list often of things that are unacceptable to engage in. For us, one of them was movies. There was swearing, sex, of course, which, as my colleague James Kubel-Komodo says, is seen as dirty and impure, and that's why you save it for the one you love. That's a great line. People who do the sinful things are out of the purity club. People who keep all the rules are in the purity club. Some religions believe it is their work to make people personally pure. People who keep all the rules stay in. And those religions often believe it's their job to police the purity line, to maintain it, to make sure that folks are staying where they ought to be. It leads not only to hypervigilance, but to posturing, to hiding shortcomings, and to competition for the title of most holy. Other traditions emphasize compassion, and there's probably a little bit of both in every tradition, but other traditions emphasize compassion. They're less focused on personal purity. Think of those t-shirts that say things like, I love Jesus, but I drink a little. That sort of thing. Compassion faith traditions emphasize feeding the hungry, working for justice, for LGBTQ folks, for immigrants, women, children. The main purpose of these traditions is to help people grow spiritually, to grow their compassion, and in that way make the world a more compassionate place. So here we are, compassion people, in 2019. And my God, what a test to compassion this era represents. We thought we had defeated Nazism. Yet, a young Jewish girl in a middle school a mile from my house was recently harassed by a group of boys who sent her videos of them goose-stepping, wearing Nazi caps, pretending to execute her. They would lift up her sleeve at school and ask where her numbers were. We made such progress on racism. We really did, though we still had a long way to go. But our president last year blessed racist activists by saying that some of them were fine people. Hate crimes are on the rise. The anxiety of these years has us stretched and stressed out, some of us not knowing exactly what to do. In anxious times, the tendency, if we're just operating on reaction and emotion, is to group ourselves together, to clump together like a herd of animals, which we are, and figure out who's in and who's out, who's safe to be in my group and who's not. Anxiety kicks that impulse up. So maybe it shouldn't be a great surprise to see on the right and on the left in this moment. Litmus tests to determine whether you're in or out. Contests over who is the most pure, the most woke, the best ally, and so on. And so we get what we have now among many progressive people and among a whole lot of religious liberals. A situation in which the furthest left option is always seen as the correct one, in which any criticism or debate is squashed quickly in favor of an implicit orthodoxy. Compassion traditions are mirroring purity traditions. And when someone is seen as veering from progressive orthodoxy, sometimes they're taken out behind the social media woodshed and issued an emotional beating. Audre Lorde, the author and feminist and librarian and a lot more, wrote, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And this fact is only threatening to those who still define the master's house as their only source of support." End quote. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. But competition, intimidation, physical and psychological violence, oppression, those are the master's tools that have built the current system. They are not likely to dismantle it without creating a new hierarchies of oppression. Now, none of us is perfect, as far as I can tell. Raise your hand if... Seems to me that's a foundational piece of religious liberalism. No one is pure. And purity isn't the goal. But the purity mindset is tempting to most of us who are part of compassion traditions. We so believe in what we're doing, and we want the world to join us. We know we're right. But driving toward purity doesn't usually help. Here's what I mean. A year or so ago, I decided to go vegan. No meat, no animal products at all in my diet, and eventually in my entire life. It's my personal commitment to environmental preservation and to ending animal cruelty. I'll admit, though, that now and then I go through an entire meal and only realize at the end that egg was used in this or that recipe. A couple of times I've even asked for no cheese on my taco, and a few bites in I realize, there's cheese on this. Now, my wife has talked me through this. Purity says, throw away that taco and demand a clean one. I don't always do that, because I'm not sure it's better for the earth, it's better for my ultimate goal, for me to throw that thing away. Now, if I'm at your house, don't go sneaking animal products into my food. That's not cool. I'm on some vegan Facebook groups, and some of the folks on there are fundamentalist purity vegans. Some of them say that unless you go vegan strictly for the animals, you're not really vegan. Some of them brag about how meat makes them gag, how they won't eat meat substitutes, like the Impossible Burger, because it's just too much like real meat. And if you do eat those burger substitutes, then you're not a real vegan either, because you're just trying to pretend to eat meat. Come on now. And what's more, now and then, I get preached at for using a straw, which I try not to do, but now and then it happens. Or for using a plastic fork, which I try not to do, but now and again it happens, by someone who eats meat. And you know what my first instinct is. I'm ashamed to admit this. My first instinct is to compete. Let's do a chart of the good each of us is doing. We'll do a spreadsheet. Whether eating meat or occasionally using plastic does more harm to the earth. Let's do this. And then look where we are. Two people who have each made serious commitments to preserve this earth we all share are now fighting each other. That is where the purity mindset gets us, friends. It fosters competition and individualism. It creates new hierarchies of oppression, and it is ultimately counterproductive. And it is everywhere in progressive faith and justice work. It has been for a long time. Social justice organizations are notorious for fighting with one another. I traveled with the UUA board in 2015 to Selma, Alabama for the 50th anniversary of the marches across the bridge. And we were in a meeting in a little Baptist church, and William Barber was speaking, and Dr. King's, I think it was his daughter or granddaughter, spoke. It was just felt like a miracle. And at the end, they wanted to honor the members of SNCC, I think it was, who sort of helped bring King and the other activists, frankly, the women of color who were there for years and years before the men came. And the SNCC folks got up in front, and somebody said, "Hey, SCLC's here too." And they had to call all the SCLC up to the front too. So these divisions are old and persist. They last a long time. But social justice organizations really are known for fighting with one another. You know what tends to happen? We lose people. They take a tongue lashing for not being pure enough, and good-hearted people who want to make the world a better place quietly slink away. And years later, some of them will still be telling the story of the time they were berated for their efforts by the very people whom they thought would be on their team. We need to build communities rather than trying to out-compassion one another. The no plastic people and the vegans and the folks who drive a Prius and the folks who ride a bicycle we ought to see one another as Team Earth, the coalition of those people working to care for our shared home, rather than competing over which of our actions does the most good. Competition, individualism, those are the master's tools. They built the house we now find ourselves in. We need new tools if we're going to make a new world, where individualism and competition have resulted in racism and oppression. That racism and oppression will not be overcome by individualism and competition among progressive people. Much more effective will be the tools that have nurtured us for eons. Community, connection, a fierce refusal to allow anyone outside our circle of concern, a commitment to work with and on behalf of the vulnerable, not in an effort to show ourselves to be the greatest of all allies, but out of genuine love and concern. These are the tools that will chip away at the house of greed and exploitation and hypercapitalism and oppression. This is not an excuse to be half-hearted or lazy in our work. Where we know to do better and do not do so, we've failed ourselves and our loved ones. But we also have to know ourselves, our limits. I will not save the world. In my 20s, I was pretty sure I would. Now I'm pretty sure I won't. Neither will you. Knowing that, what is the part I can play? Am I able to love myself in spite of my failures? Can I then love the people around me who are just as apt to failure, no more or less than I am? Can I let compassion be more important than purity, even in really important, urgent work? This is also not a call to be nice all the time, by the way, far from it. We have to disrupt the systems of privilege that privilege whiteness and maleness and heterosexuality and cisgender people in favor of greater justice. And being nice often doesn't get that done. It is, however, a call to always be in touch with our spirituality, to be in touch with the reasons we're doing this work in the first place. About 7 years ago or so, the Unitarian Universalist Association came out with a Standing on the Side of Love campaign, now called the Side with Love campaign. How many of you have a t-shirt or something or other that says Standing on the Side of Love? Yeah, if you've been a UU for a while, you might have something like that. Part of that campaign was these mustard yellow shirts that really stand out in a crowd. I told people that I have a yellow clergy shirt on, and I look like Big Bird in my clergy shirt. They have a big heart on them, and they're emblazoned with Side with Love or Standing on the Side of Love in big letters. Every now and then I see one at in the news or at a rally somewhere in the country. You know what people started calling UUs as a result of that campaign? The love people. What a reputation. And I think at our best, that is exactly who we are. We are the love people. But do you know how hard that is? Fighting with one another, competing, those are easy, natural probably. But love calls us to be disciplined in anxious times like these, to be committed to loving the hell out of the world, as the Universalists used to say. And there are signs that it's catching on. There's a new course at Stanford University this year. It's taught by Ann Firth Murray, and its title is Love as a Force for Social Justice. Murray said in a recent interview, and I want to read you a few paragraphs of what she said. The way society is organized at present, she said, is dichotomous. We have the haves and have-nots, the literate and illiterate, the rich and the poor, the black and the white, the male and the female. We're always making those dichotomous distinctions and valuing one side over the other. Violence is a strategy of people in power to maintain the existing hierarchy and the system in which we operate. So perhaps integrating the opposite of violence, nonviolence and love, into our actions would have a different outcome, she says. I would hope so. She continues, perhaps the only way is to start small, with small acts of kindness and love. One of the things she says my students are asked to do every week is to observe an instance of someone using love as a force for social justice, and then to write about it and put it on the class blog. And even if they don't notice an instance, they're asked to practice love as a force for social justice themselves and write about that. In the evaluations of the class, many students have expressed that of everything they did in class, noticing love was the part that they liked most because it made them feel that love was real, that it could be learned, observed, and practiced. And she says, I believe what we need to be doing to save the world is to practice love. Just practice it, regardless of what you call it. We've been trained to value what I would contend are forms of violence. Competition, conquering. We are awash in the colonial purity mindset that works against the very justice we seek by privileging loudness, impulsivity, and domineering behavior. Let us instead look for and practice love, to retrain ourselves away from colonialist social justice work and toward an ethic of love. For truly then, we can be sure the Master's tools will never dismantle the Master's house. Let us instead choose every day over and over in our homes, in our neighborhoods, our cities and states, and our nation to be the love people. Amen.